Hello, world. Apostle Scott Dagley here. We're going to be talking about a controversial issue. I will likely be discussing many of those because when Jesus wants me to talk about something, I'm not going to say, well, no, that's probably not a good idea. It's going to offend people. That's not how any of that works. So it's very important that we have this conversation. And the conversation today is going to be about culture and race in America. Say in America because it's where, as a human being, I have the most knowledge because I live in America. However, all of us as human beings, this is a relevant conversation because the things we struggle with are human struggles. And the things, we do right as far as treating each other, that doesn't change regardless of where you live or what language you speak. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. It seems to be a very sensitive subject, and it's a subject that, man, I'm just so glad I get to discuss it, to be honest with you, because it's needed. It's very well needed. Now, when I was growing up as a kid, I was fortunate. I didn't think I was fortunate at the time, but we didn't have a lot of money, so we moved around a lot. Bills would pile up somewhere, we'd move somewhere else. And it was usually places that were affordable for people that weren't financially stable. As such, I was able to grow up with different cultures, different races. And one thing I've noticed, just living on this earth, is that people that struggle with racist spirits, they tend to be people that grow up or are only accustomed to a single race or a single culture. And that culture might be intertwined with a religion or a faith. So it's all relevant. There was a time years ago I used to sell furniture, and I had this customer that was a speech therapist. And after I'd worked with her for well over an hour, she said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "What do you mean, where am I from?" And she was like, "Well, usually I could listen to somebody speak and tell you exactly what neighborhood they went to, what kind of school they went to." And she goes, "With you, I can't. It's just really a little bit of everything." She said, she's like, "You literally sound," best way she said she could describe it is uniquely American. Because she said, of all these different cultures and races and people, she said, I had a little bit from everybody. So I was blessed that way, and it's all, when God calls us to do something, oftentimes things, maybe in our childhood and our upbringing, we don't understand the importance at the time. And this goes with other things, anything. Sometimes we go through things we feel is tough or is a struggle, but God has a reason for it. And I have no idea, no doubt whatsoever there was a reason why God, raised me up through different cultures, around people of different races. So it's a subject I'm very familiar with. So I remember, when I was 5 years old, we lived in a mixed neighborhood. It was pretty evenly Caucasians and black folks in that neighborhood. And we remember walking to school when I was 5 years old, and there was these three little white kids, and they were saying racial slurs and things like that. And I was fortunate I had parents didn't use stuff like, they didn't talk that way. We didn't talk down to anybody because of their race or their color or their faith. It's just we were just taught from the beginning that's not something you do, and it was something I was unfamiliar with. It was the first time I had seen something like that, and of course I'm 5 years old. It's 20 years before I met Jesus, and I knew deep down inside it felt gross. It just felt disgusting. As a 5-year-old, seeing them talk that way, I'm like, what? Why? I didn't get it. It didn't make any sense. Obviously I was 5. A lot of stuff didn't make sense, but moving forward, I lived in other places, and at one point I lived in a small town in Missouri, and in this small town in Missouri, it was predominantly white, and I had this friend that was mixed race, part black, half white, and man, these people treated him terribly. And I think back on my time, I spent about 2 years in a small town in Missouri. It's called Oak Grove. It's about 20 minutes outside of Kansas City, and I just remember thinking how much I couldn't wait to move out of that town, how to get out of there. And I mean, two things that bothered me the most. One, that one church had about, I'm sorry, that one town had about 13 churches surrounding it, around it. And although we, we weren't big church people back then, we'd visited one for a little while to see what it was like. But, there was no spiritual gain from those visits. And it was the first time I really understood the religious people. They just, they know the Bible very well and can speak back any verse, but then the next time they turn around, they're putting somebody down, literally afraid of somebody because they don't have the same skin color, and it's disgusting. And I'm sure that town now, that was 1988 through early 1990. And actually, I think it was May 88 through May 1990. And I'm sure that town has changed a lot. I hope so, at least, because, it was just between the religious people and the racist people, it was a miserable place to live. And, we moved back to Michigan in 90. Place we lived in was very close to Detroit. It was racially mixed, and so you start feeling relaxed, like you're at home, because you don't have the same race of people saying racist stuff all the time. I feel bad for those folks that are born and raised in that situation. I just hope that society's become better since then, in those areas, in those neighborhoods. But one thing I learned is when anybody lives in an area where there's typically one race, one culture, it opens doors. It opens doors and makes them much more vulnerable to a racist spirit. And that's what it is. It's evil. It's an evil spirit. Anytime you look at another human being and you feel disgust because of their appearance, because of their skin color, that's not God. That's not God. Created every one of us. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're from. There's not human beings that are made by anybody but God himself, and he makes all of us. He beautifully and masterfully creates all of us with the purest of love, and that's exactly how he wants us to treat each other. And almost, when I was a teenager, I lived in most of my high school years. I lived in a predominantly black neighborhood. There was about, at any given town, counting myself, there was maybe 2 or 3 Caucasians on the bus. The rest were African American kids, and there was usually anywhere between 50 and maybe 53 kids on the bus. And there were about 9 kids lived on the other side of the neighborhood, Caucasians, that took an entire bus by themselves. There was maybe 9 to 11 kids in this bus at any given time. They wouldn't ride the other 2 buses. There were 3 that came into the neighborhood because, the other buses had black people on it. And I even had one of them ask me one time, they're like, why do you ride that bus? Why don't you come over here to the white bus? That's what they called it, the white bus. I'm not kidding. It's disgusting. But the bus stop I use is 5 houses down. As I tell you, I said 5 houses away from my home. The bus stop is. It's just 5 houses away. I'm like, why on earth would I walk all the way down here just to ride a bus with all of y'all? Why would I do that? It doesn't make sense to me. And they're like, well, but it never did make sense. I knew they're being creepy. They're just letting the devil do what the devil does and control their minds. And by the way, on that school bus, there were a lot of times in that neighborhood I faced racism being a Caucasian in a predominantly black neighborhood. I used to joke that if I had a quarter for every time somebody asked me if I was lost or tell me I'm in the wrong place, I'd be doing pretty well. Years ago I used to joke about that, but the kids in the bus, they're different. They weren't there's a high crime neighborhood, but those kids in the bus weren't the kids causing the crime. They were the kids going to school like I was, doing the same thing I'm doing, going to the same place, living in the same neighborhood, hearing the same gunshots every night, listen to the same bass drive down the road in the summertime when you're trying to sleep. And you're like, yeah, that's loud, but at least it ain't gunshots, And, we were all in it together. And that's the way I got treated on that bus. I just got on the bus and we did our thing. We went to school. And for those kids to say that, it's just ignorance. None of them ever rode the bus I rode. And they didn't know. And they chose not to know. They chose not to find out. So, I mean, we're talking about doors things that leave doors open for a racist spirit. And you know, I'll use the term bigotry, and a lot of people don't understand what that word means, but it means unwilling to change or look for change. And a lot of people associate it with racism, and I'll tell you why. Like those kids that rode that bus, they never rode my bus. They didn't ride it and have a bad experience. It's not why they did that. They did that because they had a racist spirit and they did not feel comfortable riding a bus with people that didn't look like them. And so they didn't know. It wasn't experience. They didn't experience something bad, and that's why there's never any intelligent reason when people are following the enemy. You know, when people are being led by evil spirits, there's never it never makes sense. You know, it's not intelligent. I mean, that's oftentimes for new believers. If you're watching this and you're a new believer, and you want to try to determine whether a thought's coming from God, if it's coming from the Holy Spirit, or if it's coming from the enemy, and you got to ask yourself, is it intelligent? Does it make sense? Because the things of the enemy, they don't typically make sense. The enemy doesn't care. It doesn't make sense. It works for the enemy. I remember there's a term I used to use, or not use, I never use it, it's a stupid term, but a term that folks used to use, and they would use the word reverse racism. Now that's obviously, even before I knew that all of this was spiritual, before I knew Jesus, before I was filled with the Holy Spirit, I knew that sounded ignorant, because one thing I learned in my experience is you don't have to have to be a particular race, color, be from a certain part of America or a certain part of the world or a certain part of England or Australia. You don't have to be from any one particular place for the enemy to try to feed you a racist spirit, to house the racist spirit in you. Usually it has nothing to do with that. It's kind of odd, but the racist spirit in and of itself isn't actually racist in who it chooses to infect. It doesn't care. You could be any color, be a racist. And you know, believe me, I've seen it. You know, I've had to watch folks my own color be racist, be led by that spirit, and people of other colors even you know, put that racist spirit on me, you know, because they didn't like what color I was. And it's just it's spiritual. And now we're going to get into, and I'm going to discuss something else, and that's culture. Now, culture, and to understand culture, we got to understand a part of spirituality that a lot of people don't understand. Human beings, obviously, we have a spirit and a soul, and we could be controlled, and I'm sorry, not controlled. Like, wish we could just be controlled some days, but no, we can be led by the Holy Spirit of God. You know, so there's that human spirit. But things that make up humans have their own spirits as well. Cities have a spirit, neighborhoods have a spirit, states have a certain spirit about them, and so do you know, different countries. You know, I've always often lived really close to Canada. Love Canada, it's a great place. We'd visit Canada a lot. You know, it's just what folks in our area did. Just like a lot of folks in Canada near us, they visit Michigan a lot. And but every time you go over that bridge or you go through that tunnel and you get to that different country, especially for those of us that are sensitive to spiritual things, it feels different. It was years ago, I would say probably around 95, 96. I remember I would work in the suburbs, and I managed pizzerias back then. And I remember driving home, and I lived in Detroit near 7 Mile and Gratiot. And when I drive home and I cross 8 Mile, that was the border between East Point and Detroit. So I was driving through East Point, and it had like a hump in the middle of it, you know, so it wouldn't flood. And I remember flying over that hump with my car, and I had a feeling of relief because I was home. I was in Detroit, where I lived at the time. You know, the police weren't going to pull you over because you're driving a beater, and believe me, I drove some beaters. And you know, in the suburbs, you drive a beater, that's your target. I mean, to this day, that's a thing, you know. But once I got into Detroit, I felt this peace, you know, and because I was home, I didn't have to look around for a cop that's going to pull me over because my car was a beater. You know, I could just relax, be myself. It's one of the things I liked about Detroit. And but I could feel the difference, you know, when I went from East Point to Detroit. And so, I mean, every city, every area, and even every culture, a lot of that's spiritual, and not the same as the human spirit, but much of it is made and designed and as it is because of the human spirit. I mean, spiritually, humans, we're up there with angels, as far as being the most powerful beings on this planet. Spiritually, we're enormous, the amount of power we have. So we have an effect on things, geographical things. And in societies, I know this is true for American society, definitely, but it'll be true for other areas. Somebody will look at somebody and see the way they're dressed or in the color of their skin, and they associate that with a certain culture. And I mean, you could take a person of color that was living in a rich neighborhood like we'll say Birmingham, Michigan. A lot of homes are $1 million plus there. You could take a person of color, grew up in that neighborhood, and you got teenagers trying to dress like the hip hop people they see in the videos or whatever, walk in somewhere and somebody's going to immediately assume they're from Detroit, they're from the hood. And you just can't do that, man. You can't be a spirit-led person. You can't be a godly person and just look at somebody and assume, oh, let's see, color check, what they're wearing check. Well, they must be from this place or that place. I mean, I didn't fit in a lot of places I live. As a teenager, young adult, I live in a place I just didn't fit in. If you look at me, I didn't look like where I was from. So, that's another way, God has created me an example and how I can have a conversation about this because I understand it so well. And I was 18 years old. We lived in a high crime neighborhood. It had a serious gun violence, and it was in a corner of Taylor, Michigan. And it was a place that back in the 70s, the government got the idea of, let's build the Section 8 housing. Put some HUD homes in there, some Section 8 apartments, but we'll make them look nicer than your typical projects. We're going to take all these Section 8 folks from Detroit, we're going to put them in the suburbs, and they're going to flourish. Well, that's not what happened. Come the 1980s, the 1990s, it was a place of lawlessness because police wouldn't go there. The rest of Taylor was much nicer, a lot less crime, so something happened in our neighborhood. It's nothing. Gunshot victims just laying on the sidewalk bleeding hours straight. Ambulance waiting down the street, can't come because they got to wait for the police to get there. But where's the police? They're not there. You know what I'm saying? It was neglected by law enforcement, and it was very violent. And when I turned 18, my father, he lived in my earthly father, he lived in Sterling Heights. It was a lot nicer city. And so I moved out there, thinking, okay, finally I can go to sleep quiet, somewhere quiet. No boom, 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 boom every night, and no gunshots popping off all the time. And I moved out there. I worked 3 jobs to make sure I didn't ever have to go back there again. And there was a problem I had that I didn't realize I would have that I didn't think ahead about when I moved there. I mean, I was young, and that was I walk into a place, I got a job, and I had these jobs, and people look at me and they'd assume I was like them. And not only was I not like them, I didn't understand them. I didn't understand the culture. It was the suburb culture, the middle upper class folks. And I didn't know why they behaved the way they behaved. I didn't know why they did what they did. I had no idea. I mean, I was trying to learn and figure it out, but quite honestly, I didn't like it. I thought the people were weak, and people weren't fighting all the time. People weren't violent, yelling at each other. I'm like, what is wrong with these people? I would even crash parties and try to pick fights with kids, because I was just from a violent place. And I now looking back, I know I was wrong, but it's who I was. It was my culture. And although my skin tone didn't match the culture, it was still my culture. And now I'm much older now, obviously, and I've come to accept the fact that I don't have any one culture. I can't say I lived my whole life here. I lived my whole life there. I was a little bit older. We moved out there to southern Arizona. We moved in a neighborhood where it was predominantly, Mexican Americans in the area, and a lot of folks didn't speak English. And again, they hated us, Stupid gringos, they just, the hate picked up again, white people living in our neighborhood. And And in any situation I've ever been like that, it's not most people. It's a handful. I mean, I'm not going to ask Jesus for any statistics. He's not really that concerned with the statistics. But if I had to guess as a human, I'd say perhaps 5 or 10% of any neighborhood I lived in where folks didn't look like I did. I only had, getting a hard time for 5 to 10% of people. We like to pretend that an entire race is racist. And honestly, most folks are better than that. Even in Missouri, when I lived there in that small town, they're very religious, and they had their, the downfalls that comes from not understanding other culture so well. And but even the racist folks there, as bad as they were, and they might have been 15, 20% because of where it was, but still most people were like 5-year-old me, where they see that and they're disgusted by it, but they don't say anything. In my case, I didn't say anything. I was 5. What am I going to do? I didn't really understand it or even get it at that point, but so that's something to keep in mind too. And the racist spirit is an evil spirit. And there's a lot of folks living a kind of life where they're not going to easily take in that spirit. So you can't look at a certain person and try to discern spirits by the color of their skin, by where they're from, by what they look like. You can do that, but it's just foolishness. It's Satan's foolishness, because these are folks that for whatever reason there was a door open and racist spirit got in there, and and now here we go. Because that's not, God doesn't want us to look at each other. If you could just have a glance or a moment of understanding of how beautiful God sees us, all of us, and how much He loves us, it's not from God. He doesn't care that some white girl put braids in her hair, He doesn't care that that some Caucasian talks like he's from the hood. When I was younger, I had to literally retrain myself how to talk, because it was so off-putting to so many people, and I didn't know. We talk how we talk, right? We don't know anything different. And so I had to teach myself to get along better with those around me. I had to teach myself how to speak differently. And but that's not, God doesn't want us nitpicking over that sort of thing. He didn't want to nitpick on, that dude, he's talking one way, but he looks like another way, and getting all mad and all that. That's the devil. All of it's the devil. It's all the devil, because you're getting mad because you see a Caucasian dressed a certain way, and you think they're trying to imitate, a person of color thinks they're trying to imitate them, and they take offense to that. There's no God in that. You know what I'm saying? And chances are that person is either from the same culture, regardless of their skin color, or they may even just see something they like in the culture, and that's why they're imitating it. They don't have no evil plans behind it to get one person or another, one race or the other. It's as Christians, as spirit-led Christians, we need to be very careful to not allow the devil to not only let those spirits into ourselves, but into our children, and that they're aware that they exist and how they work. And it's one of the reasons I'm making this video. It's something that's very important. The Bible says love your neighbor, and in fact, it's one of the top 3. I call it the top 3, the big 3. Jesus says, the 3 basic ways. Love God with all your heart. Treat your neighbor, love your neighbor like yourself, and you have to get through Jesus. Jesus is he's the gatekeeper, and those are the 3 major things. And when he says neighbor, it doesn't necessarily just mean the person next door. In English language, at least in America, and I'm not British, I'm not familiar enough to know what they call their person next door, but I suppose it's neighbor. It's not just the person lives next door or down the street. The neighbor by neighbor, they mean other people. And I'm not an expert at translating the Bible and things like that. I don't know what the original text says, but the Holy Spirit, when I'm praying about the Holy Spirit telling me it's everybody. It's everybody, regardless of the good looking, the not so good looking, the dark skin, the light skin, the white people, the gingers, the Asians, the natives, the Native Americans, the Inuits. We all look different, but we all look beautiful to God, to Jesus as well. And we should look beautiful to each other, regardless of what we look at. And if anything I said here makes you angry because it came from a Caucasian, then you really need reach out to God. You need to pray about that, because I don't have a racist heart, never have. I wasn't always saved. I met Jesus at 25, and different story than most. Most people, they like to hear the testimony. How did you get to know Jesus? And I went to this church and it was fantastic, and I felt this, and I gave my life to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Well, for me, it was different. For me, he sent an angel to bring me before him, and then he cast demons out of me and spoke to me. And that's just not the way the average person comes to Jesus. But however you need to do it, you need to find Jesus. If you're watching somebody who's a different race as you, trying to find the mistakes, trying to find what they might say to offend you, it's not. When you're full of the Holy Spirit, and there's all kinds of folks that are going to watch this video. There's going to be the ones that are not saved, and those that have maybe led by the Holy Spirit for years. And for those of us been led by the Holy Spirit for years, I can tell you we just can't. You know what I'm saying? We can't just look at somebody and say, oh, well, they must be from here, they must be from there, and oh, that's offensive, man, they said that. Or they, oh, why is it okay to make fun of white people, and oh, but we can't make fun of them. Well, the fact that you used the term then is a problem right there. No, we're all in this together, and we seriously need to stop. I mean, the politicians, I don't watch the news, I just don't. There's nothing good come from it, and I try to, politics go, there's good and evil on both sides of the roads, and I don't get into it. I just don't. It's a wormhole you don't want to stress yourself out over too hard. You pick a candidate and vote, that's fantastic, but don't dig yourself into the mess. Life's too important to just throw it away on stuff like that. But they're always bringing up race so much, and there's the media loves that. Some famous person said something that might be considered racist or something. People, they eat that up, and that's the devil's food. That's a devil's snack. It's not for the godly. We're not here to watch who was offended by who on TV, or who was the racist because of way they wore their hair or something. It's just not. It's not what we do. It's not for God's people. And for those of us that love God and love Jesus, who enjoy that connection to the Holy Spirit, we're not. That's not for us. So just remember, even if the slight thought comes in your mind, you want to assume where somebody's from, or make any ideals about somebody's intelligence, or whether or not they're a good person because of where they're from, what they look like, how they dress. Just get that out of your mind right now. I mean, that's probably the best advice I can give you for this entire video, is just don't let that stuff in. So that's it for now. I will end it there.